Well, it's great to be welcomed today by best-selling Christian author Philip Yancey. Philip, thank you for joining me. How are you today? How have you been?
We've survived the pandemic very well. And actually, for an introvert, a lockdown is not so bad. I got a lot of work done during that time.
Fantastic. Yes, because when we previously did an interview, COVID had just started to break out. You were in a right. I guess you're always in a writing season, but you're particularly writing, and that's what we're kind of talking about today, isn't it? You've written a wonderful memoir called "Where the Light Fell." I've got a copy of it here. And did you use a lot of that time of lockdown and isolation to write this, or was it already finished by the time lockdown began?
No, I did use a lot of that time. The project itself took me almost 3 years. Well, actually, it took me 70 years to live the life that I describe. But 3 years, pretty much exclusively devoted to the book, with an interruption there. I did a paraphrase of John Donne's Devotions on Emergent Occasions that
Yeah.
should come out next year. But my main focus the last 3 years has been this memoir. And I think it was well timed that during that lockdown period, I had very good concentration just on the final draft. It's been an ordeal. I started out, first draft was 240,000 words, everything I could remember in my life. And I cut it down to 99,000. So paring down to the most essential things and making it a thematic unity was my job these last few years.
Gosh, you really did kill some of your darlings then.
Well, either that or I got rid of some psychopathic relatives that didn't belong in there.
Fantastic. I was quite struck, Philip, when you said this. I it was in an interview that I watched online. It said you said I truly believe this is the one book I was put on earth to write. And so my first question really is, what brought you to this place where you thought, right, it's time to get my story out on paper? Where were you when you first conceived of the idea? And just share a little bit about that process with us.
Sure. I wanted to capture the subculture. I had read great books about growing up Irish Catholic, for example, Angela's Ashes by Frank McCourt. Or there was recently a book here in the US, I don't know if it was popular in the UK, about growing up fundamentalist Mormon, the book Educated by Tara Westover, a very fine book. Or books about Orthodox Judaism, the novels of Chaim Potok. But I hadn't really found a book that captured that fundamentalist slash evangelical subculture in the US. And yet it was almost a dominant subculture, very strong during the 50s and 60s when I was coming of age, growing up. And I realized as I started thinking about it that I was blessed and cursed, I guess you could say. But all we have is the life that we're given. And I was given one of the most extreme versions of that. It started out with a tragedy, my father's death, when people thought he would be healed by God and made a move against medical advice, and he died, and that kind of set the tone for our life from then on. And also it was one of the extreme versions of legalistic, narrow, exclusive, racist in my case.
Mm.
And coming to terms with that, a lot of people do. We grow up in this strict subculture. We go through this period of deconstruction where we think, I don't think that's what the Bible is saying. I don't think that's what following Jesus is all about. And then we have to try to construct something out of that. Well, what does matter? What does life with God look like? And I've been able to do that idea-wise in my other books. I've written a couple dozen books, and I've gone point by point through Jesus, grace, prayer, the Old Testament, the various things that I struggle with. And I wanted to give the backstory. So we writers, all we have is our lives. The only reason I should be a writer is that my perspective on the world is a little bit different than somebody else's. Otherwise, they don't need two of us,
Yeah.
And I found out that mine was actually quite a bit different, the circumstances of growing up. And it happened in a chaotic time of history, the 1960s. A lot of things were going on. We were discovering global poverty and injustice and racial division. And here we are in 2021, some 60 years later, and we're going back over those things and rediscovering them. And so I decided now's the time, while I still have my mental faculties, to capture this. And there are a lot of books out there on people who grew up in a conservative background and lost their faith, trashed it. That's not my story. My story is stepping back from it, and then in a redemptive way, finding how God can help a person sort through those mixed messages and the dysfunction of family, the dysfunction of church, and come up with a redemptive outcome.
Do you think if you started to write and publish the book 10 years ago, you would have come to different conclusions, or in the process of writing a memoir and gathering all that, not even information, all those memories, has time really solidified certain things, or has it caused you to reflect and deconstruct things you were really sure about? How has that process impact your memory, I guess, of what you experienced?
What was hard for me, Rob, is that I'm used to writing idea-driven books. I've done that for 40 years now. And I had a wise editor who would just slash out anything that sounded like perspective or commentary. And he would say, just tell the story, Philip, just tell the story. And that was great advice. I do have a final chapter where I add some of the perspective on it, and at first that was conceived as an epilogue. It's now part of the book, and I think an important part of the book. But it's hard to answer that question, because 10 years ago, if I had had that same editor, he would have said, just tell the story, Philip, just tell the story. And I think that was wise. I call this prequel to my other books. The others do explain what I believe, but this gives the backstory, why I do believe and what I had to overcome to believe that. So I hope it wouldn't have been that different if I had stuck to that narrative frame. My job here is to tell the story, not to give perspective of anything I've learned in the last 40 years. I tried to express it. You probably noticed, Rob, that I told almost all of the book in present tense.
Yes.
Because I wanted to express an emerging person. Because when I was a sassy teenager or a cynical college student, that's who I was. And I wanted to express that in its reality. I didn't want, well, for example, I've read fine memoirs by people. I think of Malcolm Muggeridge, one of your journalists, who wrote, I think it was a 3-volume memoir, Chronicles of Wasted Time, quite a title for his memoir.
Yeah.
And here's an old man looks back on life, thinking about his regrets and all that. I didn't want that. I wanted something expressing who I was at that time. So if I was a sassy teenager or a confused, mixed up teenager or a cynical college student, I wanted to express that in the current voice that I had at that moment in time. So I was having fun just with the writing part of it too. And I hope, to answer your question, I hope it wouldn't be that different if I had done it 10 years ago.
Yeah, and when I read it, Philip, it really does feel like you're taking us on a journey. And I think the amount of dialogue, I don't know if this was intentional, the amount of portions of dialogue in where you're going back and forth with what people said, what you said, it does make it feel like it's in real time. And I know we've got a lot of writers and creatives that listen to this podcast. Was that intentional? Was that I hate to use the word technique, but was that something you were quite conscious of as you were writing? To bring this alive, I need to put as much conversation and dialogue into this as possible.
It was. I had a tendency early on, because I hadn't really written full narratives, of giving these kind of summary paragraphs, summary sentences describing what happened. And again, I had a wise editor who said, recreate that scene, recreate it. And I have a pretty good much better memory of things going back 40, 50 years ago than I have of what happened yesterday. But I did often go back and flesh out a scene and make it real. Um, I learned something about memoirs because I read a bunch. Here's a whole new genre. So I just went out and would get an armful of memoirs from the library week after week after week for several years. And I think I made a list of them, and I think I read over 300 memoirs. And I found out that
300.
every one of them, most of them were very mediocre, some of them were badly written, and then some of them were great books. But every one of them, no matter what the writing quality was, sparked a memory in me that I would not have retrieved if I had not read that book, which is why I just kept reading them, good, bad, ugly, because what memoirs do, unless you're reading about a really famous person, you want to know every detail of their life, a soccer star or something. What memoirs do is strike chords of resonance. And in the United States, the book has been out a little longer than in Britain, and I've gotten a lot of letters and emails, and almost every one of them starts telling me their story. They're reading my story, but really what we do when we read a memoir is we kind of go on the journey with the person, and our journey is different, of course. And that's what really gets hit. We start thinking, well, how would I have reacted? What was I doing when I was in church as a 5-year-old? Those issues, those questions that come up. So it's kind of an echo experience, because I mean, who cares about the details of my life? But we all care about the details of our lives. And if something I experience spark a resonance in them, just bring to the surface something you haven't thought about in a long time, that's a very satisfying experience.
So really, the memoir is not so much what it's telling us about Philip Yancey, but what about it's telling us about ourselves. Yeah.
There's a great quote, I think I can get this right, from a novelist here in the US, Walker Percy. Very fine writer, won the National Book Award, and was a devout Catholic. He's dead now. He said about fiction doesn't tell us something we don't know. It tells us something we know, but don't know that we know. And that gets at that,
very nice.
excuse me, that underlying subliminal response that a great book does. It pulls us along and brings to the surface something we hadn't been thinking about until we read that book.
So I'm going to ask, it's a slightly unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Someone coming to this for the first time, they haven't read Where the Light Fell. They're wanting to know what's this about. If in a couple of minutes you could just share the overall, it's not even a premise, but the thought behind this book. What are some of the things that readers can look out for where your words can resonate with their story?
I'd go back to dysfunctional family, dysfunctional church. You don't have to go very far. I've done this in small groups. I've said, tell me about an interesting, eccentric character in your family, but don't go any further than, say, cousin, or uncle, or aunt. And everybody can always come up with one. There are just a lot of strange people out there.
Rolls off
and
the tongue.
And we happen to be related to them. And maybe we're the strange people. So if they were in a small group, maybe they would talk about us, probably would. But and yet somehow we're about to experience the unique American holiday, Thanksgiving, as we're talking here, Rob.
Yes.
And yet somehow on holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas, we come together with these strange characters, and we sit around a table and we laugh and go home stuffed and recharged. This is what family is. You don't, just because a guy is weird, you don't kick him out of the family, and in fact, they become kind of the spice of the family.
Yeah.
And I came to see church in the same way. I grew up in a small, narrow church, had about 120 people in it. It was racist. It did a lot of things wrong. They preached about hellfire and sin every Sunday. The same 120 people were there. The same 120 people were lectured about their sins and would come forward for forgiveness and to receive Jesus. And, you know, we were so scared of hell. And a lot of people left that church and are not Christians to this day. But for those who stayed, why did they stay? I mean, that's not a very comfortable thing to go and hear about how bad you are every Sunday. They stayed because there was a community of support that if your house burned down, if you're a woman whose husband beat you as an alcoholic and you have nowhere to turn, we had somewhere to turn. It was the church. And it was a dysfunctional group, more dysfunctional even than my family. But there was something that knit us together. And I learned from that there are a lot of people I know in the UK especially who say, well, I just don't have a good church alternative.
Yes.
The only church in my village is attended by people all over my age and over, you know, they're white haired and they just sit there and go through the same routine well, don't give up. Maybe they need you, you know, maybe they need the life that you can bring, the enthusiasm and the discovery. And I guess my message is, in the United States, I hear these people, we were told that as many as 25 to 30 million people would call themselves ex-evangelicals. That's a phrase here.
Yes.
They used to be evangelicals. Maybe they grew up going to a summer camp or a young life club or something like that. And those were good experiences, but then they ran into the dark side, anti-science, anti-gay, anti-whatever, you know. And so they left that, but they have these kind of wistful memories of that community. And when they tell me their story, I ask them, why do you leave the church? And they tell me their story, and they know I'm a Christian writer. And I kind of laugh and say, oh, the church is much worse than that. Let me tell you my story. and they say, wait a minute, I thought you were a Christian writer. And I say, well, I am. And I've spent my life trying to figure out what's worth keeping and what should be discarded.
Yes.
But on the other hand, it would be a very bad trade to forfeit a chance to live your life in connection with the God who created you, the God of the universe, that loving, forgiving God, to trade that away because of the way some church got it wrong. I had a lot of alternatives, a lot of opportunities to do that. And God in his grace and mercy met me and showed me a different way. And yeah, I had a pretty tough upbringing in a lot of ways, but as I wrote this memoir and look back on it, I'm grateful for those experiences. They nothing got wasted. They are all part of who I became. And God, the promise that we have, like in Romans 8, is not that only good things will happen to us, but that God can use even the bad things in a way that helps mature us and make us more like the image of Jesus, who we want to follow.
A phrase in the book, I think it's towards the end of one of the earlier chapters, you know, the wounds of faith embed like permanent tattoos. It is such a powerful image. I know so many people will be able to resonate with that. How does the person that has been hurt by church, who's, I don't want to say reacting out of their pain, but definitely trying to figure out what next, where does one start in terms of rebuilding and reconstructing a connection, first with God, but then the church, especially if their only, if you like, backdrop to faith has been one which has been quite cruel to them and quite confusing?
I don't know if there's a formula for that. I guess I wouldn't start by looking for the healthiest church around. Now,
yeah,
the pandemic has taught us that we can peek in on really healthy churches. In fact, during the pandemic, often as my wife and I would sit on Sunday morning, because we're locked in, we're not allowed to go to church, and the churches are shut down, we would tune into Holy Trinity Brompton, or is it All Souls Langham Place?
Yes.
Because they were doing a wonderful job and they were ministering to us. but I don't recommend that as a daily or a weekly practice, because I think church, what we're supposed to be doing is being shoved up against people who are unlike us. I think that's an important part of the church experience, and it's certainly true in the New Testament. Paul said,
Mm.
slaves and their masters, and Greeks and Romans and men and women, they're all together here. They're all one in Christ, and that's one thing that you can demonstrate to the world.
Mm.
And I would just say what happened to me is I found some very healthy people who showed me the way. One of them in particular was Dr. Paul Brandt, who's a British surgeon who lived a good bit of his life in India. That's where he grew up, and that's where he went back and ministered as a missionary surgeon working with leprosy patients. And I met him when I was writing my very first book, Where is God When It Hurts? Because he had a lot to say, very unique things to say about pain.
Mm.
He was the one who discovered that leprosy is basically a disease of painlessness. It stops you from feeling pain, and therefore you destroy yourself. All the abuse that leprosy patients endure, physical, they're really things they do to themselves. So they stop blinking because their eyes lack that little pain cell that makes us blink every few seconds, and the eyes dry out as they're open all day and they go blind. And when I started as a young journalist, this was in the era of Watergate. So Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein were kind of the iconic reporters of digging up dirt on Richard Nixon.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh man, wouldn't that be great to be an investigative reporter where you go to these like religious scam artists and you just expose them. And I did a few articles like that, and there was kind of a fun aspect to it, but I found you had to spend all your time among jerks, among the people you're exposing. And I decided it would be better to spend my time finding people who I want to emulate, people I want to learn from and be like, and get to know them. And I wrote about them in a book called Soul Survivor. And Dr. Paul Brandt is one of those people. And we ended up spending 10 years together writing books like Fearfully and Wonderfully Made, In His Image, and The Gift of Pain. And so I traveled with him. And here was a man who put together science, the humane aspect of medicine, in a deep and simple, profoundly simple faith. And I just saw it and the effect on him. I interviewed his operating room scrub nurses. That's a way to find out what a doctor's really like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he taught me this incredible lesson. The one statement that Jesus made that's repeated more in the Gospels than any other goes like this, I'm paraphrasing, that you don't find your life by accumulating things, getting more and more, acquiring. That's kind of the American capitalistic way, got to have more cars, more land, more house, whatever. You find your life, as Jesus said, by giving it away in service to others. And in the very process of giving it away, you find it. And here was this man, brilliant, highly awarded around the world, commander of the British Empire from the Queen, Elizabeth. And he had been offered to be head of the orthopedics department at Oxford University, the training hospital, and at Stanford University here in the US. And he turned both down to do what? To serve among the lowliest people on the entire planet. These are people, many of whom were in what was then called the untouchable caste, now called Dalits, who had leprosy. They were kicked out of their own, they're already outcasts, and they're kicked out of their own villages, their own families, often living in a pile of rocks somewhere. Somebody would bring them a bucket of slop food that they could eat. And Dr. Brandt would meticulously take these people and remake their hands, remake their feet, reattach the tendons, make them living hands again. And yet I had never met anyone who was more fully alive, more joyful, more grateful. He was a true scientist, so he knew the name of every bird, every butterfly, every tree, and was a grateful, joyful, joy-filled person, even though he lived in what we would consider very impoverished way. And it just that exposure to one man who got it right was enough for me to cultivate my faith. And I look back on that, it was about a 10-year period when we worked closely together. And that was a cocoon period where I could let my own faith develop. I couldn't have written my own words about my own faith because I didn't know where it was. It was still taking shape. And for people who are in that period, you know, sometimes you do need to spend a few years away from the church. But don't abandon the quest. Find people that you really want to be like. We have an author here named David Brooks.
Yes.
And he's a New York Times columnist and a converted Jew. Just recently converted to Christianity and is open about that. And he talks about the difference in resume virtues and eulogy virtues. And so we spend so much of our time on resume virtues, trying to accumulate a good resume to show all the good, important jobs we've had. We keep climbing up the corporate, or we have degrees from this prestigious university. You know, these are the things that we spend our lives chasing.
Yes.
But he said the funny thing is, at a funeral, nobody talks about it. Nobody says, oh, he had the wisdom to buy 100 shares of Microsoft when it was so small. You never hear that at a funeral. You hear he was compassionate, she was charitable, he cared for his family, she cared for the earth. You know, these are the eulogy virtues, and instinctively we know these are the more important things. We really should be chasing those, but it's so easy to get caught up in the rat race. And I would say for a person who's sensitive to faith, to chase those virtues and to find people who you really want to be like, not just who might help you in your career or something, but people who have the qualities that you would like to show others. And then gradually, as you are around people like that, in my case, for example, with Dr. Brandt, I saw where I needed to grow. And fortunately, I could talk through that with him, and he would help me in that process, became a mentor. As you know from the book, my father died when I was a year old, so I had no father. And he became a father figure for me. In fact, I thought, oh, this is great. I can kind of choose my own father.
Yeah.
And we don't have to go through that teenage individuation rebellion stage, you know. And gradually, I got a picture of what healthy faith looks like and what a healthy father would look like, which is an image that I think God wants us to understand, because there's so many unhealthy fathers around.
Do you think, I mean, I was thinking about some of the inner dialogue you articulate so brilliantly in the book, and some of the questions you had, some of the tensions that maybe we would not hear from the pulpit because we don't like to come across as admitting some of the things we're not sure of and the things that we doubt. How can we as church leaders and followers of the way, how do you think we can create an atmosphere, an environment for people to come and just be completely open and honest about the struggles that maybe we don't hear preached from a pulpit every Sunday? There's no doubt we need to get better at facilitating the humanity of the congregation, but what would you say from your experience and from what you've written in the book? What would you say we as church leaders and Christians could do to help people come back into an environment where they don't have it all together?
I'd say a couple of things. There's really nothing like the old personal testimony that grips people. And even like the Methodist Church here in the United States, which has been in decline as it has been in UK,
Yes.
but they have this thing called the lay witness mission, and they get people with a story of transformation, and they're not clergy, they're just lay people, but they're on a list, and they will go to your church and give a 5 to 10 minute testimony of their story of how God met them and what difference it made. And so the clergy doesn't have to do that all by themselves. If they can use some lay people who are comfortable in sharing a story that like a memoir, stimulates, summons a chord of response in the congregation. That's a good thing. And then there's some things that are much better surfaced in a small group session. Mm-hmm. So when you're a group of 8 or 10 people at most, and you've gotten to know them over the years, and you've shared your struggles with children and illness and death of parents, all these things that are part of life. That's a much safer and healthier place to do that kind of intimate sharing. But I think we have so much to learn from the recovery movement, the 12-step Alcoholics Anonymous model of just being very open about we're here because we're needy, because we don't have it all together. We're here because we're thirsty. And there are a lot of ways that are unfortunate that people try to solve that thirst. That's what the recovery movement is all about, but it doesn't work. And so we can help each other in the journey. We need to be honest. They insist on honesty, and they insist on dependence. I can't make it on my own. I need the help of a higher power, and I need you. I need my buddies, my friends in this program. And that's an important model that the church can learn from, and clergy can take the lead. I'm not saying necessarily that it's good for clergy to get up and start talking about all the sins I committed this week. That's not a good thing. You're the pastor, you're the shepherd.
Yes.
But creating an atmosphere where a person is rewarded for honesty rather than punished. A lot of people feel that if they're honest in church, somebody's going to punish them. They're going to be looked down on. Oh my goodness, I can't believe they did that. And instead of, well, thank you for being honest, and God can take honesty. Yes. God can take anything except indifference. God loves honesty, and God loves dealing with it. And if it needs forgiveness or if it needs transformation, that's God's business. That's why we're here.
Yeah. Would you say that if I was to ask you, are you filled with hope when you look at the church? Would you say you are? Or if we look at the wider goings on, and we won't go into that today, the evangelical movement, do you think, gosh, there are some things we really need to pull back down to basics and learn from the early church, the book of Acts again? After writing this memoir and reflecting on what you've experienced and what you see going on in the world now, are you filled with hope? Are you seeing pockets of grace being dispersed all over the place, or do you really have to look closely to see those things happening?
I'm glad you said around the world, because if I only saw the church in the United States, I would be maybe not in despair, but discouraged, because it's kind of like a corporation now. It's been around a while, and you see these mega churches, and the infrastructure is there, and it's solid. So you've got publishing companies and video companies, and then websites, and there's a good, strong infrastructure. However, it's hard to relate to a corporation. And I love traveling to places like the Philippines or Africa, where the gospel sounds like good news. It's not they don't have a 300-year history of fits and starts to try to figure out. It's just they read what the Bible says, and it says take care of widows and orphans. So, we should do that, and they start taking care of widows and orphans. And I've seen that in so many places, and that's where I experienced the buoyant life of the church, and it's a beautiful thing to see. And wherever I go in the world, I've been to about 85 countries. If missionaries have been there, there's a trail of orphanages and clinics and hospitals and educational institutions and groups that are fighting sexual trafficking. Imperfectly, there's still all sorts of problems in the world, but the little settlements of the kingdom of God are being planted, have been planted wherever the gospel hits. And I remember the first time I went to Sweden. It's a very clean country, charitable, cares about the environment and all that. And I happened to be reading a book on the history of Europe. And in that book, it said that for 250 years on the continent, most prayers ended with the line, "Lord, save us from the Vikings. Amen." And I thought, what happened to change this country known for these warring, pillaging Vikings into, modern day Sweden with all its social quality of life and all that? Well, the gospel happened.
Yes.
And not that many people even believe in God in Sweden anymore. But Jesus said that's what happens. You plant the seed in the ground, and eventually the kingdom blesses everything around it, even when people stop believing in it. That's just the way the gospel works. And we have so much to be thankful for looking back in history. And my goodness, it's messy the way it happens, with a lot of bad decisions and mistakes, lurches along the way. But when I go to countries that have been affected by the gospel, they're different in good ways, in positive ways. The quality, you can look at any major quality of life measure we know, Transparency International or prosperity or freedom of the press, gender equality, care for the environment. In all of those, they list countries that do it well and countries that don't do it well. And everyone I've seen, at least 19 out of the top 20 will be Christian heritage countries.
Right.
Again, Scandinavia is in there, and many of them are not. There aren't that many people who are actively involved in the faith, but the gospel affected their culture in dramatic ways. And that stands out when you travel around the world.
What's the one thing you'd want? Well, there will be several things, but what's the one thing you'd like people to take away from this memoir, Philip, when you were writing, or when you put that final word on the page? What were you thinking God was going to do through this particular work?
Well, again, what I learned was that memoirs touch people about their own lives, not just the person they're reading about. And I would like it to be a message of hope, because I started with a lot of the odds stacked against me. Living in poverty, living with an extreme, unattractive version of the faith, very narrow, very racist, exclusive. And a lot of reasons to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And I found that that knee-jerk reaction was not a good one. It wasn't healthy. And a much better way was the way God showed me that if we allow God, He can take even that raw material and create something of beauty out of it. The title of the book, Where the Light Fell, comes from a quote by St. Augustine, who said, "I couldn't look at the sun directly, but I could look at where the light fell." And for me, the things that brought me back to God were things like nature and classical music and romantic love. And I realized as I experienced those that I had been given the wrong version of God. My vision of God was this bully in the sky trying to smash people and keep them from having a good time. And as I experienced the goodness of this world in those things, nature, classical music, and romantic love, I wanted to know the God who was responsible for those, who created those things. And I met that God at a time when I wasn't really seeking it and wasn't desiring it, but God in His grace reached out and changed me. And I guess the one message I want for readers is, let God form your own story too, because God is an artist. We are called God's work of art, poema, in the book of Ephesians. God works with all sorts of raw material. Some people come to Him after a life of drugs and addiction and stuff like that. Mine was the opposite. I came to God after a life of church abuse
Yes.
and family abuse, toxic family, toxic church. And in some ways, maybe that's even harder because we want to get away from anything remotely like that, the circumstances we grew up in. But I look back with gratitude, actually, that God was able to use all of those things, all those Sunday school things I heard and hated when I was a kid. I'm grateful for those now. They gave me a foundation in the Bible that I've used as a writer ever since. And there's so many things like that I wanted to get away from. And God's tendency seems to be not to solve our problems, to take away the things we don't like, but to somehow weave them into a better picture, to create good out of bad. I think of God as the great recycler. He takes the things that we want to get rid of, we want to discard, our old cell phones, and scrapes away the gold and the little minerals that are important, and creates something of beauty out of them. That really is, I think, God's pattern, and I hope that comes through in my own story.
Wonderful. And as a final question, and the details about how people can pick up the book, they'll appear on the screen now, but there'll be someone watching this, they have a story to tell, they've a gift they've been given. What would your final piece of advice be to our listeners who are holding their story right now quite close to their chest and are hesitant to release it into the world, whether it's through spoken word, writing, like you've done? How can they steward that well? And I know it involves an element of discerning when's the right time to release it, but what would you encourage our listeners to do in terms of taking the next step to steward their story well?
Yeah. When I was writing this book, I tend to go off to a little place we have in the mountains and spend time alone. And every time I would go out there, when my wife knew that I was going to be dealing with a traumatic memory, she would be worried, and I'd come back, "Are you okay? Are you okay?" And I would smile and say, "Yes, that was the greatest week ever." Because secrets have their power. I start with a secret in my family that I didn't know about for 18 years, powerful secret. And when they're repressed, when they're hidden, like a wound, if you keep covering it, it'll never heal. You need to expose it. It's got to get used to the air, to the light again, or your skin will never really heal. And secrets are like that. And you're right, you have to steward very carefully when you let them out. But I've been surprised. We don't have time to go into it, but the story of my brother is a very powerful story, someone who went the opposite direction of me in every way. And I was nervous when I told his story, but actually it was a healing thing for him. He felt it kind of validated his existence in a way, and has gained the strength to make moves back toward baby steps back toward reconciliation in the family that I would not have imagined. And start with one person that you really trust. Maybe you do have a small group or a family member that you can really trust. Start there. But I think you'll find that as you let those secrets out, it allows healing to come in. I certainly found that. And I didn't rush in it. I've waited for 40 years or so to tell these stories. But that's the only way that true healing can come, I think. There's so many people who wait until their deathbed, and then they'll drop this bomb, that they've been keeping close all these years. And that's not healthy, because people don't know what to do with that, and they can't really react, and they can't go through the stages that you need to go through for reconciliation. But I hope it does show a way, not the only way. I hope my story shows a way toward coming to terms with a lot of negative things from my past.
Well, Philip, thank you so much for your wisdom, for taking the time to write your memoir so we can see ourselves in your story. And as always, it's wonderful to get some time to speak with you. So thanks so much.
I enjoyed it, Rob, and I understand this is going to a lot of other countries.
It is. It's going across, I think, 6 continents and many networks. So
that's great.
Translations as well. So it's going to be.
That's great.
Hopefully touch many people.
Yeah, the translations will take some time, I'm sure, for the book to get out there. But if you can speak English, you can get the version published by Otter, right?
That's it. Philip, thanks so much.